We'll give you some information a little bit here on this explosion in Nashville that happened on Christmas Day. Thank goodness only 3 people have been reported injured despite massive damage to the surrounding area of the blast. And while officials are saying they believe this was an intentional act, there was a clear warning urging bystanders to evacuate prior to the explosion. Take a listen to this.
Evacuate now. If you can hear this message, evacuate now.
That explosion caused widespread communications outages that took down police emergency systems, and authorities, as I mentioned, do believe that the blast was intentional, but still don't know a motive or a target. The Metro Nashville Police Department released an image taken from surveillance video showing the recreational vehicle involved prior to the explosion. Several hero cops were responding to the report of shots fired when they encountered the RV, blaring that recorded warning that a bomb would detonate in 15 minutes. And the timing of the blast kept this from becoming a much bigger tragedy. Those hero officers on the site certainly deserve a debt of gratitude, and they are, clockwise from the top left, Officer Amanda Topping, Officer Brenda Hosey, Officer James Wells, Officer Michael Sipos, Officer Richard Lullen, and Sergeant Timothy Miller. The FBI has taken over the investigation, and certainly we thank these brave police officers for their service, their sacrifice, and their courage during this situation. And we will continue to be following this. Certainly, Nashville is a place that the population has grown. People are moving to Tennessee as they sort of escape the coasts. And here in New York, people are used to being on guard for either domestic or foreign terrorist incidents. So this is certainly a unique situation in the heartland of America, and we will continue to follow this story as there are more developments here on Newsmax television. Okay, let's get a check on the rest of today's headlines at the Newsmax News Desk with Rachel Roller, who's filling in for Kayla Ayers. Rachel.
Good morning, Tom. Well, Michigan Governor Gretchen Whitmer says she's happy she was passed over to be President-elect Joe Biden's running mate. Whitmer says there was a sigh of relief, in fact, in the governor's mansion when Biden announced he was picking Kamala Harris for running mate. The Michigan Democrat, however, did say she would take the job if it was offered, and she also admitted that she was, in fact, vetted for it. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo's wife, Susan, has tested positive for coronavirus. The State Department says that the Secretary of State has been quarantining as a precaution, even though he hasn't tested positive himself. This comes as the State Department canceled the rest of its holiday parties after announcing Pompeo's quarantine. And Michael Jackson's Neverland Ranch has finally sold after being on and off the market for years. Billionaire investor Ron Burkle bought that ranch for $22 million. But get this, back in 2015, the asking price was $100 million. It dropped to only $67 million in 2017. Jackson died in 2009. Those are just some of your headlines. If you're looking for more breaking news, you can go to newsmax.com.
One of the greatest success stories of the COVID era comes from the state of West Virginia. That state has the fastest vaccination rate in the country. And this while many other states are struggling with resources and logistics. And we're joined now by Governor Jim Justice of the state of West Virginia to discuss his strategy and how he's managed through this pandemic. Governor, thank you for being here on Newsmax television. What are you doing in West Virginia that could be a lesson to a lot of the other states in America?
We have truly been the miracle. I mean, if you just think about where we're located, we don't have an ocean or a lake that is protecting us. We have 2/3 of the population of the whole country that surrounds us, and yet West Virginia has to date only lost 1,129 people. Now, this thing has jumped all over us in the last few weeks, just like it's done across our whole country. But, we made the first move in the nation to be able to test all of the people in our nursing homes. You know, we made the first move in the nation to test all the assisted living. We've had to shut things down in the early beginning and everything, and we made those moves at the right time with the right experts advising me on what to do. But now when it comes time to really be able to do something with this vaccine, you got to move. And so we've just brought all of our local pharmacies into play, and we've got these things pumping out, and we're moving, and we're moving. You know, we've got a third. I mean, think about this. 3% of our population is from nursing homes or assisted living. 3% of our population, and we're going to have them completely tested, all the staff, all the workers, all the nursing home residents and assisted living. We're going to have them all done probably by December the 28th, when everybody else is just starting to roll this thing out. So the faster you move, the more lives we're going to save, and that's what we're trying to do.
Now, Governor, you recently got the vaccine live on camera. What's the reaction that you've gotten, and why did you do it?
Well, I did it first and foremost to try to convince our people that this was safe and it was the thing to do. Now, you know, as far as how it's been with me, it's been terrific. I mean, I've had relatively no arm pain whatsoever from the vaccination and nothing else. I feel great, and but we need, you know, our leaders needed to step up, take the vaccine, let our people see that it was perfectly safe, because this thing's not going to be the end-all, do-all until we get 75 or 80% of the people vaccinated.
Do you have lockdown restrictions in place in your major, in your cities and in your larger communities, or no at this point?
No, and absolutely, I don't intend to do that in any way. You know, we need to, I mean, we really need to work really, really hard as soon as we get through this Christmas break to get our kids back in school. Now, we've done this on a county-by-county basis, and some counties have been in school and some not. And recently this thing has run across us, you know, like it has across our nation in a pretty aggressive way. But the bottom line to this whole thing is, as far as shutting down our businesses and so on like that, we can't, I mean, through all of our medical team, we can't find any one place where people can show me, if you shut this down, this is going to make a significant difference. If that were the case, I'd do it.
Right.
But really and truly, when you shut something down, you're making a significant difference on the other side as well. You know, from people, you know, not having a job and everything else that goes with it. And so with all that being said, we're not shut down anywhere. And what I'm really hopeful to do is we're going to get our kids back in school, even though we've been through a situation where we were color-coded and counties went and counties didn't. But especially the younger kids, middle school and under, you know, I mean, all the science tells us go to school.
You also provided $25 million to aid West Virginians to help them pay their utility bills during the pandemic. How much are they struggling, and what do you think of the federal aid package that was just signed or just passed?
Well, two things. You know, naturally, you know, in West Virginia, in all states, there's people that are really hurting, and we ought to have all the empathy and compassion we can possibly have to help them every way. And we've done that, and we to be able to be business. You know, I've said over and over, I'm a business guy. I'm not a politician. I don't want any part of being a politician. But from a business guy's standpoint, we've managed the economics of West Virginia, you know, with the CARES money we've had and with how our economy's run and not shutting our economy completely down and shutting the engine off and everything. And West Virginia's done quite well, you know, from all that standpoint.
You know, I want to talk about your relationship with the president a little bit. You ran as a Democrat. You switched parties. You ran as an outsider. You're a businessman. You very much kind of approach governing very much the way that Donald Trump does. You're friends with him. It doesn't look like it's going to work out. A second term is going to work out for him. What do you think he should do next?
Well, I don't know. You know, I am a dear friend, and I want him to make those decisions. I don't want to. You know, if he asked me that question, I would answer, but I'm not just going to answer on my own. You know, I think he's done a marvelous job, and sure, you know, Donald can get at times out over his skis a little bit, and but for crying out loud, look at the accomplishments. Look what has happened to this nation, from a standpoint of accomplishment. It is unbelievable, and but I know how much it's hurt. I know how hard he's worked, and I know how taxing the job's got to be when you're getting shot at in a lot of different ways all day long, and a lot of it's unjustified. So, and we are a lot alike, but we are not alike in some ways. I did run as a Democrat in West Virginia. If you knew the people of West Virginia, you'd know that there's not a lot of difference between Democrats and Republicans in West Virginia. I ran as a Democrat most all my life. I'd been a Republican. I could see real quick that I wasn't going to be able to achieve what I wanted to achieve here. Plus the fans, the standpoint of the presidency and how close I was with the president, it just wasn't going to work. I switched parties, and since that time, we've gotten a tremendous amount of things done. But we are a lot alike, except I say this, I don't say this egotistically, but I won every single county in my reelection. Every county in the state of West Virginia. In all honesty, the President of the United States should have almost won every state, and I think it's a shame.
Governor, Justice, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate it, and we hope to have you back.
All right, anytime. Thank you guys so much for all you do for all of us each and every day. Thanks again.
We've perhaps never been so happy to see a year come to a close in recent memory, and people have high hopes for 2021. But let's keep perspective, America. 2020 wasn't just about the danger and vulnerability we experienced because of a virus. Humanity has faced viruses and diseases before. As a nation, we have faced greater challenges, and the world over the last century, some of those years make 2020 look like a picnic. What has made this year perhaps more difficult was that many of us believed the media. We lived in a social network reality, and we trusted the government to make decisions for us. The virus was used to fundamentally change the way that we view ourselves and our nation, and perhaps for the first time in our history, we became truly subservient to our government. What did China hope to accomplish with this virus? Sure, they wanted to create economic chaos in the West, and they did, but they also understood that there is a powerful strain in our media and our politics that is a shadowy reflection of the ideologies that underpin Chinese government. The Chinese understood that politicians afraid of losing their jobs and those who would jump at the chance to exert more control over the American population would really do their work for them. What they would produce is a flattened economy and a less free society. So instead of focusing our population on preventative measures that have been successful in other countries, cheap drugs like ivermectin or HCQ, or vitamin protocols like vitamin D, C, and zinc, used many other places around the world, we had a debate about masks. We turned our health care over to bureaucrats and politicians who've never treated a patient. Doctors were silenced by social media. Physician independence was all but destroyed by government pressure, all while disjointed and ever-shifting decisions, often not backed by science, were made by government and made the government's treatment for the virus as deadly, if not even more damaging, to our society. Remember, the virus didn't kill your job. It didn't force you to lose your income. It didn't crater your business. The virus didn't force us apart. Government did, and we'll be feeling the impacts for years. From the lockdowns that have destroyed people's livelihoods to increases in government surveillance, to massive spending that could result in a further drift towards socialism with things like universal basic income, changes in private property rights, vaccine passports, public or private imposed restrictions on freedom of movement, impacts on personal privacy, the government in 2020 has shown its cards, and we can't take it lying down. In New York, you can even download an app that will tell you when you are in 10 feet of somebody who has tested positive for COVID-19. Does that sound like America? Remember, Joe Biden, the squad, the far left, they're just getting warmed up when it comes to using this pandemic to drive an agenda that's very different than the America we know. So in 2021, we must resolve as a nation to stop looking to government for guidance. They have been wrong at basically every turn throughout this crisis. They have a nation living in fear instead of focusing attention on how best to help the most vulnerable and help the most people. They have pulled people away from each other, waiting for some big, expensive, big pharma solution. And just when it seems that that might be in sight, what did they do? They moved the goalposts again. Dr. Fauci now says we need 90% of Americans to get the vaccine in order for the pandemic to subside. So in 2021, resolve to open your business. Get a group of people together from your industry and sue the city, sue the state. Take reasonable precautions, but come together as communities again. Buy local, buy American. Start your own Memorial Day parade if the spring comes around and they say, no, you can't do that. Have your kids play sports outside. Get those schools open. And demand reliable and complete scientific evidence be provided for any restriction on your personal rights. That's the formula for America's resurgence. That's the formula for American greatness. Not being a herd of sheep waiting for Washington or your governor to tell you, your doctor, or your employer what to do. So what did China wish to accomplish? You got it right. Fundamentally change America. And in 2021, America needs to push back. Coming up, our look at the new faces of the GOP continues with Congressman-elect Barry Moore of Alabama. We'll see if he's ready to back his senator's move to block electors who back Joe Biden. Stay tuned.
Meet America's preppers. They're prepping for the worst disasters, weather catastrophes, terrorism, even a nuclear war. Americans like you with bunkers in their homes, stockpiling food, guns, and the tools of survival. Watch Armageddon Arsenal on Newsmax TV.
And welcome back to America Right Now. I'm Tom Basili. Our continuing series of interviews getting to know the new faces of the Republican Party in Congress brings us this morning to Alabama's Barry Moore. He grew up on a farm in Coffee County and then started a waste hauling business before serving in the state legislature. In less than 2 weeks, he will head to Washington to be one of our nation's newest members of Congress. Congressman-elect Moore joins us now. Congratulations, sir. Good to see you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Tom. I appreciate you having us on.
You have perhaps one of the most unique backgrounds of any of the incoming freshman members of Congress. So talk to us a little bit about your early life and your career and why you decided to run for Congress in 2020.
Well, you know, I like I said earlier, I grew up on a farm and actually went off to college, came back and started on my own waste hauling company. And the party recruited me in 2010 to run for the state legislature. I did that and got elected. And it was a calling. We didn't necessarily seek out political office, so to speak, but people asked us to be willing to go serve. And so through the process in 2015, I became the first elected official in the nation endorsed then Donald Trump. And they told us at that point he had no chance of winning the race. And so, but we felt like we were where we needed to be. We thought he could bring a voice to government that had been non-existent for a few years. At least I felt it had. And so we got on the Trump train before it left the station. And we continue that fight. We think we're here for such a time as this, and we're going to continue to fight for our president, for our nation, and for the populace, the people, the voice that has been lost so often in the process and in the swamp.
You know, you've been a small businessman. How specifically do you envision advocating for America's small businesses in Congress?
Well, I think we've got to open the economy. I agree with you, Tom, in the prior segment. We have to open this economy. Capitalism can fix most of the problems. Granted, we need to do it with wisdom, but this is the first time in the history that I can remember that we actually quarantined healthy people. And now they're talking about herd immunity, and a few months ago they told us that didn't work. So we have to start opening this economy. The damage basically for the prevention of the spread of the disease is going to be far-reaching beyond just this virus if we don't get people back to work, start the economy churning again and let people get out and start living their lives like Americans.
You served in the military as well, so first of all, thank you for your service. What do you think the biggest challenge is facing our men and women in uniform today, and what issues related to their mission will you work to advance in Washington?
Well, I think it's interesting to note that Donald Trump is the first president since Jimmy Carter not to deploy troops. We don't need to be sending our men and women into combat zones for endless wars. And so he has done a fantastic job. And as chairman of Military and Veterans Affairs, we could always count on them to help us meet the needs of our veterans, our active duty, our retired. And it's just something that I think going forward, obviously I'm a strong proponent of building a strong military. Defense and infrastructure are two things that government provides for this country, and we all agree to do that as a union. But at the same time, I don't think this president has risked lives unnecessarily.
He vetoed the defense authorization bill the other day, which has a lot of good stuff in it that even he supported, including upping money for cybersecurity, modernizing some of our military infrastructure, and then also giving us the ability to deploy more resources to try to counter China. Do you think that that was the right move? And what do you see as the biggest threat moving forward for America?
Well, I think the reason the president vetoed it is pretty clear. It's in Section 230 where these media outlets are starting to censor free speech in America. And that is a national security issue, too. If we lock people in their homes and then we censor free speech, there is not a chance for the people to talk, to get among themselves, and actually to begin to understand where we want to go as a nation. And I think censoring free speech, that's very damaging. I think that's why Newsmax has had so much success as the populace in this nation come together. They get behind people like the president, like your station, your production, and that sort of thing. And I think the president vetoed that for the right reasons. And I think that he truly does have freedom-loving Americans in the crosshairs, if you will. He wants to make sure that he protects that free speech.
All right. Your incoming Senator, Tommy Tuberville, is saying that he may challenge certain slates of electors in the presidential race on January 6th. If he does, would you also support such a challenge? And are there any states where you have seen enough evidence to force a vote on whether or not to toss those slates of electors?
Yes, early on I met with Congressman Mo Brooks in the House, and it was something that he had decided to take this fight on and protest these electors. And I hope Coach Tuberville will join us in that fight. I feel like he will. We have other House members that are coming on board. And if you just look at the elections around the country, I mean, we went to bed at midnight on November 3rd with Trump projected to get 300 electoral votes. They shut down the votes in different cities, Philadelphia, Detroit, Atlanta. And then all of a sudden you saw this surge of 131,000 votes at 6 a.m. and 140,000 votes at, 1 a.m. Mm-hmm. And we woke that morning and things had changed. And there is enough evidence. If you look at the counties President Trump won, he won 18 of the 19 bellwether counties in this nation that indicate the next president. Biden lost Ohio and Florida. Not since 1960 has a Democratic president lost those two seats and won the presidency. Right. And then if you look down the ballot, we've got 24, they call toss-up seats in Congress, 24 seats that Republicans won every single one. People don't go into a voting booth and fill out a ballot for local elections, the Senate and the House, and then just don't mark the president of their party or mark the opposing party.
No, look, there's certainly a lot of questions out there, Congressman, and we're going to be watching you on January 6th on the floor. And congratulations to you again. Congressman-elect Barry Moore of the state of Alabama. We can't wait to see what you're going to do next. So thanks for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate you.
Still ahead, all eyes on Georgia. Control of the U.S. Senate is on the line with two runoff elections in Georgia in just days. Up next, William McGinley and Thane Rosenbaum weigh in on what must be done to secure the election. Don't go away. And welcome back to America Right Now. With the Georgia Senate runoff elections approaching rapidly, is the state ready to host a fair election, or are we going to see a repeat of November all over again? What do the campaigns need to do now to ensure the integrity of the vote? Let's bring in our panel to discuss. William McGinley, principal of the Vogel Group and former White House cabinet secretary under President Trump, and Thane Rosenbaum, distinguished university professor at Touro Law School. He's also the author of Saving Free Speech from Itself. Bill, let me start with you. Democrats have been working the mail-in vote angle again very heavily. They claim to have more than 1 million mail-in votes already requested. Is the state ready to ensure a fair election, or are we just going to see deja vu all over again here?
So the Republican Party and the campaigns have to force the transparency that was needed before the 2016 election. They do that by making sure that they have the manpower not only to man the early vote locations, but also the counting locations and receipt locations where the absentee ballots are going to start coming in. This is a critical part of any election day operation, because this is what gives you the early warning that something may be afoot. And so the Georgia Republican Party, both Senate campaigns, the NRSC, everybody else needs to be fully manning these stations. The other thing that they need to be doing is they need to be filing open record requests with the county registrars where these votes will actually be counted. And the reason that they want to do that is they want to make sure that they're not going to see some of the stuff that was pulled in Philadelphia, where the observers were kept 100 feet away, then 25 feet away, where there was no meaningful opportunity to observe the count. Now is the time to start pressing on that.
Right.
And the other benefit of doing an open records request is it takes you outside the election law and gives you a separate statutory regime to march into court to force the disclosure from these election officials.
Professor, a number of the courts have ruled, who have ruled on the Trump elections fraud cases, have indicated that the campaign really should have gotten their act together before the vote. They could have litigated a number of their issues before the election. Really, to Bill's point, should the Republican campaigns here be looking at options for how they can ensure the process is fair, utilizing the courts to do it? The other thing that Bill didn't mention, but I think could be available, is also getting impound orders for machines and ballots as well. But your thoughts on what they could be doing now, utilizing the court system ahead of time?
Well, you're right, Tom. There's a fateful error in not bringing these cases before, although there was a case that was before the Supreme Court on an emergency position out of Pennsylvania that got kicked down the line till after the election. But the real point here is the concern over the mail-in ballots, because remember, all of the judges in over almost 80 of them of the 50 lawsuits, what they focused on was widespread. That was the word they were talking about. There's no evidence of widespread fraud, and there were no evidentiary hearings able to demonstrate the amount of discrepancies, modifications, the various shifts in the election laws that were done without legislative approval. So the real question is now, does Georgia feel free to conduct the same kind of election where signature verifications are going to be suspended or modified, where canvass workers can fix defective ballots by providing missing information? Do the Georgians now think that since the presidency allowed these shifts in light of the pandemic, that this very same kinds of changes to election laws and different standards between precincts, this is very important. Even in Bush v. Gore, the Supreme Court said that the states have to have a unified system of elections. And Georgia was clearly a very outlier state where you were subject to much higher scrutiny if you stood in line with your driver's license than if you mailed in your ballot from home.
That's something that definitely needs to be addressed by the state. Bill, the president's veto on the defense bill likely to be overridden Monday and Tuesday. There are votes already scheduled in the House and the Senate. His a bit of a switch in position on the COVID-19 bill at the 11th hour, angering many in the GOP Senate. Do you think that between concerns about the election integrity and then also these sort of this tension between McConnell and the president now, that could have an impact on turnout in the Georgia election?
Look, I think that definitely it's going to resonate what the president said this last week on the COVID relief bill. I think resonated with conservatives. I think as he went through the litany of provisions in there that were completely unrelated to the pandemic and relief for American businesses and the public health systems trying to deal with this public health crisis, I think that was a strong speech. And then he laid out the political case why Congress needs to keep its focus, its eye on the ball on the American people. I do think that it also demonstrates the reason why the two Republican senators, Loeffler and Perdue, need to be reelected and sent back to the Senate.
Right.
Because if you want to preserve President Trump's legacy, if you want President Trump to have any shot on January 6th, he's got to have those two seats in Republican hands. And Senators Perdue and Loeffler have actually been pretty strong in support of President Trump. And so I think conservatives across the state of Georgia need to listen to that, own their vote, understand how you're going to vote for this runoff, make sure that you vote, and call your friends and neighbors who are also supporters of the Republican Party and President Trump and make sure they turn out.
Absolutely.
This is a voter turnout election. This is going to be a daily grind. And right now, the campaigns and the parties are not focusing just on winning the day. They're focusing on winning the hour, both in terms of the news cycle and in terms of politics. And the data operations have to be ramping up so that they can track who's voted, who hasn't, so that they can micro-target their get-out-the-vote operations.
All right, everybody does need to get out and vote. William McGinley and Professor Rosenbaum, thank you both for your insights.
Thank you.
Straight ahead, in our Faith in America segment, we look at the... And welcome back to America Right Now. I'm Tom Basili. Let's check in at the Newsmax News Desk for the latest headlines with Rachel Roller. She's filling in for Kayla Ayers. Rachel?
Tom, thank you. The coronavirus relief package has arrived at President Trump's Florida resort in Mar-a-Lago. Now, that's where he's spending the holidays. The bill is also a government funding measure, though, needed to avoid a government shutdown, which could, in fact, happen on Tuesday. Trump has not directly threatened to veto that measure, but he has urged Congress to raise the stimulus checks to $2,000 from the $600 that was introduced. Earlier this week, Congress passed a $900 billion coronavirus relief bill and a $1.4 trillion omnibus to fund the government through October. Well, President-elect Joe Biden and Vice President-elect Kamala Harris are urging Americans to keep their guard up with coronavirus. Now, this was during their Christmas messages. Biden says he will be missing his family this year, urged others to keep their gatherings small if they happen at all. Harris says that this Christmas season will be very different. Now, keep in mind, public health experts have urged people not to travel for the holidays, all in an effort to stop the spread of coronavirus. Well, one man's fortune turns around in Charlotte, North Carolina after winning $250,000. Preschool teacher Joe Camp says he won the jackpot on a scratch-off lottery ticket. Now, Camp had a rough year. He lost his job and his father due to coronavirus. Now he says he wants to use that money to buy a home that he can pass down to his grandchildren and then pay for his daughter's education. Those are just some of the headlines we're following right now. For more breaking news, you can go to newsmax.com. Tom?
Thanks, Rachel. We are in the midst of the Christmas season, and that means baby Jesus, of course, but it also means food. Even in the pandemic, our smaller gatherings center around that dinner table. Father Leo Paddlinghug is the founder of Plating Grace, and he joins us now for our Faith in America segment this week. Father Leo, great to see you. Merry Christmas. You're one of my favorite faith guests because you have such a fantastic background. You're a breakdancer, you're a martial arts master, and you're a gourmet chef. And you use food as a way to talk about faith to audiences all over the country. How do faith and food go together?
Well, interestingly enough, Jesus was born in Bethlehem, a city that literally in Aramaic means house of bread, and in Arabic it literally means house of meat. And he was placed in a manger, a word that literally means, from the Latin mangiare in Italian, to eat. And I think what people are hungering for the most right now is time for not just simply the food on the table, but the gathering and the community of the people around the table.
All right. One of the reasons why your ministry is so exciting is because of the way that you approach talking about God. It's very, very unique. Isn't that what's really necessary to attract people back to Christianity, particularly young people? Whether we're talking about food or we're talking about, somehow relating your martial arts experience with the gospel?
Yeah, I'm a strange priest in many ways, but what I've done is try to tap into something that is truly universal. The word Catholic in Latin means universal. In Greek, it literally means a fullness of spirit. And if there's one thing that's universal about people, no matter what religion they are, is that they have to eat. And one of the things we've got to do is try to find an opportunity to eat together. Even if you don't like each other, if you are willing to cook good food and serve it, that is a language of love.
All right. Now, you feel that's the use of social media and videos and others, needs to be done more to use that, to use an industry term and maybe a term that you would appreciate, the sort of snackable bites of God's word online. Do you think that that's really necessary now? And I see a number of priests doing it. You're one of the biggest guys out there on social media. Do you think that that's starting to make a difference?
Well, I think so. But at the same time, we all have to learn how to make theology, faith, truth bite-sizable. Because the fact is, I also have to serve bitter herbs of truth. And a lot of people don't always like that. So what we need to do also is how to sweeten up the bitterness. It makes arugula taste so much better.
So, Father, what is your favorite dish to make when you're talking about Christmas time, for instance? Let's do that.
That's a really fantastic question, because a lot of people get very nervous about what to cook for their families. And what I say is learn more about what they are hungering for and see if they can come in with you in the kitchen and work together. The whole organization of Plating Grace is to try to bring families and friends closer together around the dinner table. And even though this is a time of pandemic, we can still find opportunities in a safe and healthy way, because Christians know how to be safe. I'm not sure why all restaurants are closed down, but we need to find a time to work together to feed each other.
All right, and I've got about 35 seconds for you. I was explaining this to my kids. Christmas isn't a day; it is a season. Give me 2 or 3 practical things that people should do to take the spirit of the holidays and make it last all year long.
So first of all, make sure that you're praying together, not just reserving it to Christmas and Easter. Make sure prayer is an important part. Secondly, do something for people who can't help themselves necessarily, people who can't pay you back, the homeless and all of the people who are in serious need. And the third thing is to continue to give gifts to each other, not necessarily material gifts, but the spiritual ones, like listening to each other, forgiving each other, and more importantly, sharing your heart with them. Father
Leo Paddlinghug of platinggrace.org. Check out platinggrace.org. Check him out. Really, really fascinating background and a fantastic message. Always great to see you. Merry Christmas.
My pleasure.
Up next, a very special edition of our look at life for aging Americans and their relatives. And we'll see what they need to do to prepare in case the worst happens.
It was called the Living Will, where you would just write down a few things. But that's been very upgraded to a concept now called healthcare directives, and you appoint an individual who's your healthcare agent to speak on your, not just for you, but through your wants. So you educate them through the advanced directive, what you want done, and then by the appointment of an agent, they are in a position to act on your behalf. Really important because, especially now with healthcare being so different than it was just 9 months ago, we need to be able to make sure that the care providers have someone to talk to.
Right.
That they have someone that you have anointed and appointed and that you trust to speak on your behalf.
Sure. Sherry, what about, even more basically, even more practically, just making sure people know where the financial documents are?
That's something, with all this time we've got sitting around home, this is a really good time to get organized when it comes to sort of the fundamentals of one's life. So they're your insurance policies, hopefully your will, any declarations of where you want your stuff to go. But if you don't mind, I'll take a half a step back and say almost everybody should have a will. You don't have to be 70 to start thinking about it. If you've got property or you have children, it's important that you declare in your will who should take care of your children if something happens to you, or what happens to your property, so it gets divvied up as you want it to be. And this is the time to talk to your family about what your plans are. You know, our society has a remedy for people who don't make these decisions in advance, and it's the court system. And the courts have rule sets that they go by that are necessarily put there for the larger public, but might not be what you want.
And Sherry, you don't want the government, and not to interrupt you, but we're running a little bit short on time, and you don't want the government making these decisions, basically, for you.
You want to make them based on your family, your needs, your desires, and your plans.
All right.
So this is the time to get professional help, get your thoughts together, get it on paper, and then tell the people that you have chosen on your behalf
Sherry, I got
what you want done.
Thank you very much. Sherry Parrish, thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tom.
Brought to you by Super Beets, a superfood breakthrough for blood pressure support.
From the makers of top-selling Super Beets comes new Super Beets.